Welcome everyone to A.S.A.T. It's a brand new channel, and here you will find a whole lot of information about some random topics related to biology, particularly in biology. I hope that you enjoy the video, and please do give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoy the video. So in this video we are going to talk about the development of heart. Development of heart is going to be divided into three parts, so there will be two more subsequent videos. The first part that is going to be discussed in this topic, in this section, is the development of the heart tube. Now after that we will discuss the development of the interatrial septum and the interventricular septum, followed by some clinical cases and correlations. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, to start with the development of the heart, where does the heart development start in the case of an embryo? It starts in a place called the cardiogenic area. Now, where is this cardiogenic area located? It might be asked to you by the teachers. So, you will see that the cardiogenic area is located cranial to the procaudal plate, or which is also called the oropharyngeal membrane. So again, another part is that from what structure is the heart or the entire CVS is developed. So you will see that it is developing from the splanchnopubic mesoderm, lateral plate mesoderm. So it develops from the splanchnopubic lateral plate mesoderm. Okay, so what and how the development starts or works. First of all, there will be the development of two tubes, as you can see here. These two tubes will be present in the cardiogenic area, and these two tubes will further fuse to form a single tube. Now this fusion is somewhat different than a normal fusion in such a way that the upper part will fuse completely while the lower part will still remain intact. So what we will get in the end is that a single tube with one upper end and two lower ends. Now this single tube will further undergo modifications, or you can say convolutions, to give rise to what is the typical heart tube. This is the typical heart tube right here, and I have labeled different parts of the heart tube here. So let us just discuss first of all the different parts of it, and then later on we will discuss the derivatives of the tubes. So the first part, the upper part, is the bulbous cordus part. Now the bulbous cordus part is further subdivided into three parts. What are these? The first one is the posterior 1/3, which is closest to the primitive ventricle. Then we have the conus part, and finally the uppermost part is the truncus arteriosus. Now below the bulbous cordus there is the primitive ventricle. Below the primitive ventricle it is the primitive atrium. Now primitive atrium, below it we will have sinus venosum. So this whole structure that we see right here is the sinus venosum, and obviously this sinus venosum is subdivided into two parts. You can see this part, this is the body of the sinus venosum, and then we will have two horns. These two structures that are coming out below it, these are the horns of the sinus venosum. Now the sinus venosum will have certain venous drainage. Sinus venosum will have venous drainage, and particularly there will be three veins draining it. What are these three veins? First one is your, for example, if you're talking about the left part, and there will be the separate one for the right part. So the same name will be there, but obviously there will be a right one and there will be a left one. So the left one will have the left common cardinal vein, then followed by left vitelline vein and left umbilical vein. Similarly, on the right side we will have three veins: right common cardinal vein, then we have right vitelline vein, and finally we have the right umbilical vein. So this is the general structure of the heart tube. Again, there are certain other parts which are important for the other videos, not this one. Like for example, this is the bulboventricular septum. It will be playing a role in the development of your interventricular septum. For example, this bulboventricular septum will help in the formation, or will give rise to the interventricular septum. And then we have the AV orifice. Then again, this is important for the development of interatrial septum. So not much of importance in this video, but obviously for the diagram point of view it is important. Now right here we see this is the AV orifice, and here on the AV orifice there will be development of certain two cushions. So you can see here two cushions. This is maybe the ventral cushion or the posterior cushion, dorsal cushion, ventral cushion, whatever you can say. So these two cushions will fuse and in future will give rise to the septum intermedium. I think I missed through this part. This was the sinus venosum, and the left atrium and the right atrium part was supposed to be in the primitive atrium. I hope you noticed it as well like me. So anyways, this is the body of the sinus venosum, and I drew by mistake these two structures right here, so that is obviously my mistake. But again, leaving that aside, we have the body of the sinus venosum, and this is the right and the left horn of the sinus venosum. Right, we were talking about the primitive atrium. The primitive atrium will be further subdivided into the right atrium and the left atrium. So right here we have the sinoatrial orifice, which will be which will be connecting the primitive atrium and the body of the sinus venosum. So this is the general overview of the heart tube. Again, I'm sorry about this part. You have to, when you draw it, please correct it yourself, and I am really sorry for this. Anyways, we move to the derivatives of the heart tube. So this is an important part. This can be asked in the MCQs, in the quizzes, in the obviously the vivas by the teachers, and it can also be asked in theory papers. So like talk about the different derivatives of the heart tube. You may be asked about the development of the heart tube itself and enumerate the derivatives of the heart tube as well in that. So again, this part is very important. Diagram wise, I know this was my mistake, and when you draw it, please correct it. Now, the derivatives of the heart tube are as such. First part is obviously the bulbus cordis, and like we said, the bulbus cordis has three parts in itself. First part is the truncus arteriosus. Now the truncus arteriosus will develop into the future aorta and pulmonary trunk. So how will it be divided into the pulmonary trunk and the aorta? It is divided by the development of the spiral septum. Now the spiral septum is not formed from the truncus arteriosus, but it is rather formed inside the truncus arteriosus from the neural crest cells. So the spiral septum is formed from the neural crest cells inside the truncus arteriosus. Function of the spiral septum is to divide the truncus arteriosus into the aorta and pulmonary trunk. Now you can imagine what will happen if this is damaged. The blood mixing will be there and other things will happen. So there is a tetralogy of a disease. I think I will discuss that in the future in the clinical aspect. So apart from that, this is the obviously this is the truncus arteriosus. Now we come to the conus part. The conus part will be responsible for the development of infundibulum of the left and right ventricle both. You need to pay attention to what I am talking about. When I talk about this right and left ventricle, I am talking about both of them. Sometime, somewhere later on, you will find that some part are specifically responsible for the development of only one side. So please pay close attention. Now the posterior 1/3 will form the rough part of the right ventricle. Like I said, only one side is being made. What side it is? It is the right ventricle. So you have to pay close attention to this while writing. You might often confuse it. So the posterior 1/3 of the bulbus cordis will give rise to your rough part of right ventricle. Then what about the rough part of the left ventricle? Again, the rough part of the left ventricle will be formed by primitive ventricle. Right ventricle, posterior 1/3 of the bulbus cordis, and left ventricle from the primitive ventricle. Now we move to the next one, and that is the primitive atrium. And the primitive atrium will give the rise to the rough part of both left and right atrium. So here we don't have to differentiate. Both the left as well as the right atrium will be developed from the rough part of the primitive atrium. Very simple, right? Now we move to the next one, and that is the sinus venosum. Something is different here. What is different here we will discuss. So as I told that the body of the sinus venosum is this one, and there is the left and right horns, right? and this is the entire body. This entire part is the body. Let me actually make it more colored so that we can avoid this differentiation that I made by myself. I hope the structures are somewhat clear now to you. Obviously, I'm sorry for what happened earlier, but we were talking about the sinus venosum, right? So the body of the sinus venosum and the right horn of the sinus venosum, they will remain intact. What will happen to the left horn of the sinus venosum? It will obliterate. Now, to be particular, to be more specific, the body of the sinus venosum and the right horn of the sinus venosum will be absorbed inside the right atrium, right here. So we can see that the body and the right horn will be absorbed inside the right atrium. Now, since I said that the left horn will be degenerated or obliterated, what will happen to the veins that are accompanying it? They will also degenerate. About the veins of the right atrium, the right horn of the sinus venosum, only one of these veins will degenerate, and the rest two veins will give rise to the superior and inferior vena cava respectively. So which one will degenerate? The right umbilical vein will degenerate, and what will be left? The right common cardinal vein, which will give rise to the superior vena cava, and then there will be the right vitelline vein, which will give rise to the inferior vena cava. So this is somewhat the overview of the development of. So that's it for this video. Next part will be obviously the development of the interatrial septum. I hope that you will enjoy that video as well. Thank you.